fifth installment in the series brings us to the legal fiction, lawful rebellion, or Freeman movement. Representation on ZDAY 2013 and at the subsequent joint event in London was by documentary filmmaker and lawful practitioner Jon Webster, who has used some of these methods successfully in dealing with defending himself and others against unlawful claims. To find out more about this subject and before continuing on with this presentation, please watch his talk at ZDAY by clicking on the link in the description below. The title of the follow-up event between the Zeitgeist movement and lawful rebellion was, "Are you sure you know what the law is?" As was pointed out by Jon, what most people refer to as the law may not be what they think it is, at least in the current way our culture has instituted it. I'd like to step back a little further, however, than just merely the ins and outs of law in its current form, to ask what the origin of the whole idea of law actually is, and how the current opaque version of it plays an instrumental role in the illusionary matrix of control that exists in the world today. Thus the title for this presentation is A Matrix of Control. The other reason for this title and approach regards a direct reference to the Matrix film trilogy, in which humanity are enslaved to a race of machines called the Matrix, who control humanity's perception of reality by plugging them into pods from birth in order to feed off their energy. The Matrix trilogy is actually a remarkably clever allegory for the world we live in, and I'll be using this to help lay out what this real-world Matrix is, why it is this way, and how we might break free from its spell. These slides come courtesy of Mark Passio from whatonearthishappening.com, so a massive thanks to Mark, and if you would like a more detailed understanding of this allegory, then I recommend watching his presentation entitled The Matrix Decoded on YouTube, and of course the trilogy itself. Part 1 of the trilogy asks the question, what is the Matrix? This is crucial if you are to even realise that there is such an illusion in the world to begin with. The first film starts as all three movies do, with the female lead of Trinity in distress, and the hero of the films, Neo, asleep. Notice that the name of the hotel she is in is called the Heart, a spiritual reference regarding the place where all profound change must start. Neo is awoken by a message on his computer telling him to wake up. The Matrix has him, and to follow the White Rabbit. It then reads knock knock, and with a violent knock on the door he finds a group of friends asking him to come to a club. He is about to say no until he sees a tattoo of a white rabbit on the shoulder of one of the members of the group and changes his mind. Follow the White Rabbit is a reference to Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, and the number of the room Neo is in, room 101, is the room that houses your deepest fears in George Orwell's 1984. Both stories about reality not being quite as it seems, as well as the need to face your inner fear and go a little deeper down the rabbit hole to find the truth about the way the world really is. At the club, Neo meets Trinity. Trinity's job is to bring Neo to Morpheus to find out what the Matrix is. These names represent the three cornerstones of change in consciousness: actions, emotions, and thought. Neo is an anagram of 1, and could also refer to the neocortex, which is the outer layer of the brain controlling our lower primordial reptilian functions of fight or flight originating in the amygdala, and the last to develop evolutionarily. Neo represents our will to morph our thoughts and action together to effect change. Trinity represents our spirit, or heart, and Morpheus, the mind's capacity for integrated thought. The Oracle guides Neo on his journey, representing intuition and prophecy, displayed in the scene in which she imparts some ancient words of wisdom in Temet Noske, or Know Thyself. The agents of the Matrix capture and imprison Neo, trapping his mouth shut, signifying that the last thing the control system wants us doing is speaking out about it. They would rather we engage in the drama of it all than question the premise of the play itself. This is where the Zeitgeist movement comes in. The movement is an educational, non-political sustainability advocacy group engaged in spreading positive value associations and orientations to the surrounding culture. The movement recognizes that the problems we face in the world today have a root cause embedded in the fabric of the governing structure of the current global economic paradigm, and in the long run, this will have to be surpassed with a shift in our values that perpetuate its existence if we are to solve the myriad of problems facing humanity at this time. Whilst there may well be well-intentioned organisations in the world seeking to address the symptoms of this disorder, they do not address the systemic nature of the causal root mechanism behind these social and environmental problems. This is where the movement is different. We question the matrix itself, recognising that without an understanding of this root cause and offering a tangible, realistic and workable alternative, these problems will continue to manifest themselves. The first step on this journey of discovery is the desire for truth, even if it stings, just as Neo displays by taking the red pill over the blue in his meeting with Morpheus in order to find out what the Matrix really is. But not everyone wants to take the red pill. It's hard to see the world as it is, and many of those that do want to go back to sleep in Wonderland. Just as Cypher, the Judas figure, does in the first film, opting to portray the human resistance in favour of going back to the fairy tale world of the Matrix. However, ignorance is not bliss, as Cypher espouses. It's the last bastion of the beaten. For once you know something, you can't unknow it. Therefore, the more accurate term to advocate such a position would be cowardice, which doesn't sit nearly as well as ignorance now, does it? Awakening to the true nature of the problems we face and the causes of them does not come without a shock to the system. And this is the world Neo wakes to find himself in, and precisely what must be awoken to in our shared reality. The cosy little image the mass media portrays about how shopping and growth will resolve all of our problems and that we can somehow overcome them by using the same system of thinking we used to create them in the first place should seem to any rational thinking person at least as completely preposterous. This may well be the case, but it is of course entirely understandable as an established culture rarely steps back far enough to question its governing principles. The last thing a fish would ever notice is the presence of water until you take it from its tank. Just as many philosophers thought to question many facets of human thought, interactions and social customs, they never thought to question the morals and ethics towards owning people. We now, of course, all look back at this in utter disbelief, as we do many other practices in history. So what is it that people will look back upon our times and gawk at for how primitive and outdated our current values, customs and beliefs were? Well, perhaps the fact that we currently need 2 Earths by 2030 to keep on our current rates of consumption, the last remaining rainforest could be consumed in less than 40 years, species are going extinct at 1,000 times their normal rate due to human activity, over 70% of the world's fish species are disappearing at an alarming rate due to overfishing, and 99% of the materials used in the process of manufacturing for the goods on sale ends up as waste within 6 weeks. Or maybe that on a human level, 1% of humanity own 46% of the world's wealth, a figure that's gone up from the previously touted 40%. 80% live on less than $10 a day, 50% on less than $3, and 1/6 of this planet's human population are starving to death on less than $1.25 a day. Something will hopefully be obvious to our future relatives, and that is that we were victims of our culture, completely asleep to the true state of the social order and era in which we were born. Of course, no one likes to be woken from this deep sleep. I personally struggle to come to terms with the scale of the system disorder at hand, as well as the enormity of the challenge that lies ahead to change a globally distorted value system. Indeed, when you take a look around, it's hard not to feel overwhelmed by it. Just look at the front pages of your newspapers. From what's going on X Factor to what size Jordan's boobs are this week, it's clear that vast swathes of people are lapping up the bread and water distraction circus with a chalky biscuit. Just take a look at the Osama bin Laden assassination. Now, I'm not saying he was or was not assassinated when the US government said he was, because in all honesty, I don't know. I wasn't there. However, You would like to think that the general public may wish to see the film footage said to be taken during the raid, some picture evidence, some DNA evidence, or some kind of proof, but no. They accepted it on faith of the supposed authority of the mainstream media and their government alone. But it's not all about the lies you tell, it's about the truths you don't. Because surely, if the media really were doing their job, you might think that the trial of and guilty verdict handed out to agencies of the United States government in an American civil court trial in 1999 for the killing of none other than Martin Luther King might have been big news, right? Or if there is truly nothing suspicious in the slightest about a 47-story building collapsing at near free-fall speed into its own footprint from office fires in New York on 9/11, as World Trade Center 7 did, that the media would report it enough each year so that more than 46% of the American population even knew it happened. But they don't. I'm not saying that I think it was an inside job or who did it, I'm just asking why it is not common knowledge, that's all. I often ask people how many buildings fell in New York on 9/11, and I am regularly met with the incorrect answer of 2. The resulting effects following that day, inside job or not, is a war on terror. Really? A war on a word? Well, doesn't war create terror? So you're having a war on the consequence of the actions you're engaged in. In the words of comedian Steve Hughes, when's this going to end? When they've got the terror? It's okay, all the terror's gone, we're moving on to horror next. I once had a meeting with someone who was once high up in the marketing department of a major cigarette and soft drinks company who said to me, the reason that these conspiracy theories run rife, whether valid or not, is because the system we live in makes them believable. The propensity for self-preservation and maximization are built into this system inherently. So why wouldn't governments lie if it serves in their interests to do so? It should be expected. To ask for collaboration on the scale now needed to face the many challenges that lie ahead from something based explicitly on competition is grossly naive. It's like expecting apples to grow on pear trees. So what is the matrix? Control. Or more specifically, mind control via illegitimate authority. The machines in the Matrix films do not simply represent technology. They represent a machine-like consciousness, devoid of feeling or empathy, just emotionally void inputs and outputs with no connection to the real-life needs of the people. This is the prevailing control system that dominates our world through a web of abstract and unfounded belief systems rather than tangible evidence derived from our shared reality. From the legal system to religion to politics, all play their part, but the biggest, most misunderstood and pervasive of all belief systems is money. There are lots of people who will readily discuss so-called economics within the parameters of the current socio-economic paradigm, but the word economic is employed in a kind of Orwellian doublethink kind of manner to mean the exact opposite to which it is supposed to refer. This system's so-called economic health is based on the need to speed up the consumption of our life-sustaining finite planetary resources devoid of any protocol for prudence whatsoever. The exact polar opposite of the meaning of the word economic. Infinite growth on a finite planet for any rational and sane-thinking person should translate as ecological suicide. And the driving force behind all of this so-called economy is money. As the old saying goes, follow the money. Okay, let's do that, by starting off with how it's even brought into existence in the first place. This should seem like a critical question, though it is rarely discussed in the mainstream media. The good news is that it's far simpler to understand than the high priesthood of economists would have you believe. It's fractional reserve banking, and it goes a little something like this. Imagine 11 people are on a desert island and decide that barter is becoming a bit of a pain, so they're going to use a token of exchange to represent the value of the good or service in question instead, called money. One person decides that he will be the one who takes it upon himself to lend money out of thin air to the other 10 that must pay him back in 1 month with 10% interest. I have no idea why the islanders didn't call time out when he decided that he has the right to create the means by which people will meet their needs on the island, but oh well. A month goes by, and when the payment time comes around, of course there is not enough to settle all outstanding debts, and at least one person comes up short. Don't worry, says Mr. Banker, you can just take out another loan at a higher rate of interest and pay me next month. Meanwhile, he can use some of this higher rate of repayment to pay some of the other 9 who did better that month and who have decided to save their money in his vault. Based on having roughly 10% of the new loan amount he is making, he can now loan more money out of thin air to new arriving islanders at interest. And this is generally how the modern global banking system now works. Money comes into existence through the fact that the bank has sufficient funds in reserve, usually 10% to back up the loan requirement, and that someone wants the loan. Then the bank simply transfers the amount required to the borrower's account to be repaid with interest. Interest that was never created in the initial loan, which means that even if all the money, or debt, as it should be rightly called, were to be repaid to the private banks, not governments, who created it in the first place, then we would still owe the interest. Which means that the debt will never, ever be paid off. This scarcity is built into the heart of the money supply itself, forcing people to chase around phantom interest to survive, to mention nothing of those who already have a lot of money earning money for already having money in a high interest savings account. Money that has no attachment to any life-sustaining good or service, and which figuratively is being paid for by those who are struggling to repay high-interest loans at the bottom of the financial pyramid. It's a game of money musical chairs, and when the music stops, which it does when pyramid schemes do what they do and collapse, someone is always left out to dry. And this is why inequality and poverty is what it is. We wouldn't sit by these people whilst eating a brie and wild rocket panini and slurping on a skinny latte whilst they starve to death, but it's far easier to do when they do not seem real through a television screen. It is far easier to think that problems of this magnitude come from some thoroughly outdated socially Darwinistic assumption of human nature rather than an expected consequence of our socio-economic system. That same system we endorse with our most cherished beliefs about who we are. This baseless Malthusian notion runs deep in our cultural baggage and is still, unfortunately, being transmitted to the next generation. This mentality is hardly surprising, though. Surely there must be a good reason why you get to live a prosperous life whilst billions suffer. But there simply isn't. There is just a fantasy pyramid Ponzi scheme that has slowly been sought by the rich elite to serve their interests. And why wouldn't they sort such a thing? They simply know the game and how to play it. These are your Agent Smiths of the Matrix, if you will. But it won't do any good to just wipe them out, as I often hear people say. They are not hundreds of years old. They were produced by and a product of our socio-economic system, not an anomaly of it. It is what our system produces. Why should this mentality of many in the financial arena be so surprising to us? As long as we adore the pursuit of vanity, egotistical dominance, and making money to make more money to make more money, then those who are the best at making money are pretty pleased. The question is, when is enough enough in this game? And that's just it. It isn't. As the character Gordon Gekko from the movie Wall Street puts it, I create nothing, I own. This is the machine-like consciousness I'm talking about. Just inputs and outputs in which enough is never enough. Those who know how to play the game are just playing better than everyone else by the rules on the board. It is actually not only them who are the bad guys. It is all of us who agree to continue to play the game with them. The bottom line is that systems produce what they produce, not what we wish them to produce. Which brings us on to what this system does very, very well, and what the matrix of control requires the most for it to function. Obedient, consumption-hungry workers. Pressures of such a structure based on preserving or requiring scarcity to persist is the need for what could be called cyclical consumption. money must continue to circulate to keep demand for new loans and people employed in the marketplace. This occurs through money circulating between the three players on the economic stage: the employee, the employer, and the consumer. Anything that stimulates the circulation of money between these players is good for the monetary market system. This need for increased circulation of money leads towards two forms of inefficiency in the manufacturing of goods, which could be termed intrinsic and planned obsolescence. Intrinsic obsolescence is when a good is made by cutting corners on costs to remain competitive with other producers in the marketplace, thereby appealing to those slightly lower in the financial pyramid. And planned obsolescence is when a good is made to deliberately break down respectively fast enough to ensure a turnaround in profit is made. In this system, waste, debt, home repossessions and conflict are rewarded ventures. Sustainability, longevity and true efficiency or recycling protocols built into goods at the production level do not come into it. But there is something that the matrix requires as well as consumption, and what could be termed as a rogue program in the system, if you will, and that is the need for employment. No jobs, no money, no stuff. However, with the exponential trend in technological efficiency, we will soon start to see many of the jobs you would never expect to see being done by machines, done by machines. Any company that wants to remain competitive with companies that automate will have to follow suit by doing the same, meaning that the people who are made redundant by these machines will no longer have the purchasing power to buy the goods on sale, and the market will gradually cease to function. So the game is up. Whether it's through debt collapse, cyclical consumption, or technological unemployment. The only question is whether we can see the matrix for what it is and move away from the values of consumption, materialism, and vanity that pervade modern culture, and uphold this value system disorder fast enough to avoid this continued systemic collapse. The real war is one of values. Are we going to elevate collaboration and unity around a grounded decision-making process to meet human needs on a global scale? Or are we going to engage in false dichotomies, stay divided, and fight each other for the last bit of oil left under the ice? This type of behaviour is one of the ways in which the Matrix justifies its tyranny. Chillingly put by Agent Smith to Morpheus when he says, "When I tried to classify your species, I realised that you're not actually mammals." Every mammal on this planet develops a natural equilibrium with its surrounding environment, but you humans do not. You move to an area and multiply until every natural resource is consumed. The only way you survive is by spreading to another area. There is another organism that lives on this planet that follows the same pattern: a virus. You humans are a disease, and we are the cure. But we don't have to be like this. Not if we don't want to. We have shifted our values in the past, and we can shift them again. But we must first learn to let go of the bondage imposed upon us through irrational fear and our now thoroughly outdated social system by using the most important word in our vocabulary towards this matrix of control. And that word is no. Just as Neo does at the end of the first film. Say no to buying meaningless crap that you don't need to make impressions that won't last. Say no to endorsing harm upon your fellow human beings. Say no to illegitimate authority. Say no to your leaders. Say no to needing to have leaders. Become your own leader and say no, 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 no until you're fed up with saying it, and then say it again. Take pleasure in being maladjusted to a system in which the richest 85 people on this planet have more wealth than the bottom half of the human population. Take pleasure in saying no when asked to endorse any aspect of a system that spends what it would cost to feed the billion malnourished members of your fellow human family on it in just 8 days on instruments of war. If that's the system you say I should say yes to, then I choose to say no. But saying no is only the first step. Part 2 of the trilogy, asks the important question of why we are in the Matrix. Again, the movie opens with Trinity in distress and Neo asleep, for without an understanding of why we are in this position, we are essentially fumbling around in the dark for the light switch. So what are the causal factors that shape human behaviour? Why have we come to this place in human history? The subject of human behaviour is well covered in the other movement materials, so I'm not going to go into much detail on this subject. But the short story is that if we do have a nature, then we are not all that restricted by it. We create more variables in living arrangements than any other species, and the secret to our evolutionary success above all else has been adaptability. The only way you can really talk about human nature is through human behaviour, which has dramatically changed over time, and is hugely subject to environmental influence. Modern science does not discount the idea that we have certain individual genetic propensities, but to put all of our behaviours down to this is clearly absurd. We can see the effects of environmental influence by looking at extensive research carried out by an organisation called the Equality Trust, which found that in developed countries where the gradient between rich and poor is greater, you find a far higher amount of social health issues as a direct consequence. Whether it is life expectancy, maths and literacy scores, infant mortality, homicides, rates of imprisonment, teenage pregnancy, levels of social trust, obesity, mental illness, drug addiction, or social mobility, people in more equal societies do better in all areas of social, physical, and mental health, showing the drastically important role that environmental influence has in shaping human behaviour. In this second movie, we see the human resistance underground in Zion. Zion, as used in Kabbalistic tradition, means the spiritual centre at which reality emerges. The underground movement that recognises this illusion is growing, and the internet is its means of transmission. We can see by attempts such as SOPA that the control system feels a threat to its dominance over information from this source, and is precisely why it's critical to protect the internet and the free flow of information it allows. In this sequel, Neo must now rescue the Keymaker from the Matrix, who represents the subconscious mind, and our need to unlock this area to access the mainframe of the Matrix, which is the final destination of the One, or Neo, as prophesied by the Oracle or our intuition. In this search, Neo meets the Merovingian, who were a ruling dynasty in France in the Middle Ages, and who represent the egotistic desire for power, control, and money. They ask the question of why is he here, in this place? Why is it that humanity have reached this point? What is the causality? Cause and effect. This is why we find ourselves in this situation. Our measurement of the reality in which we exist started with primitive roots. As a complex, conscious and inquisitive creature, man had to find ways to explain the perplexing world in which he found himself. So he made deities, demons, rituals, ghosts, spirits, and formulated many philosophies and theories in an attempt to explain the enormity and overwhelming nature of reality. In the malaise of the metaphysical whirlpool of opinion and rhetoric regarding the causation of events and the prediction of future ones, have we actually found a decision-making process by which we can come to some sort of agreement with others, regardless of creed, culture, or ethnicity? Yes, we have. And that is the scientific method. Science is the best approach we have for predicting future events and making more accurate measurements regarding the physical reality we all share. It's completely devoid of human opinion or ego, and as shown here is simply asking a question, doing some research, developing what you consider to be a reasonable answer, otherwise known as a hypothesis, devising an experiment to test that hypothesis through empirical observation and measurement, and drawing a conclusion from the analysed test results. Others can then repeat your experiment to verify its validity. It casts aside or updates a theory when new evidence comes to light, and never proposes the truth. It merely seeks it and updates itself upon new findings. Put simply, it's environmental feedback, via our increased understanding of nature and its laws, and is the reason you have homes with running water, modern transport systems, fridges, pencils, clothes, and everything in between. Because guess what, folks? You live in a dictatorship. You always have. It's called nature. Sure, you can vote that a tsunami, earthquake, or volcanic eruption should not destroy your home and violate your democratic rights, but unless you have prepared for this eventuality in a very real, objective, and technical way, then I'm afraid you're just going to die. So with such an awesome decision-making method that has been applied in every way possible to enhance our way of life, the question here should surely be, why don't we use this as the decision-making method for our social system to meet the needs of humanity? I don't see everyone agreeing on a political system, religion, or monetary economic policy anytime soon, but they all seem to agree that the world is round and not flat. And science is the reason we know that, not abstract, opinionated, illogical, or egotistical belief. Of course, scientific consensus changes over time and is subject to vociferous debate, but evidence shines a light on our ignorance eventually, and over time has allowed an emergent understanding of the truth regarding our place in the cosmos. This is why we must adopt this method if we seek to bring humanity together. Neo finally meets the architect of the Matrix. He is told that this is not the first time he's been to see him with the question, "Why am I here?" This is the 6th version of the Matrix. There have been other destructions of humanity. The anomaly is systemic, and the problem is that of choice. The architect denotes that the Oracle was initially created to investigate aspects of the human psyche, and she stumbled across a way in which 99% of the subjects would accept the program. The architect goes on to say, those who refuse the program, though a tiny minority, if left unchecked, would constitute an exclaimed possibility of disaster and failure. The job of the One is to go back to the source of the Matrix and reload it. In this he is saying that you will demand a new system of control after you get rid of the current one, but it is this belief in illegitimate authority that is the true problem here. The illusion of choice is a fantastic way to maintain control. Do you want Republicans or Democrats, liberal or conservative, Coke or Pepsi? All a largely meaningless choice based on a popularity contest when in fact, whoever you vote for, you always get the government. In the realm of law at least, some form of authority is necessary when human needs in a society are not met, and if the conditions that cause the subsequent aberrant behaviour that comes with said unmet needs are either not supported by the orientation of society, or worse still reinforced via seemingly unappreciated externalities such as income inequality, then we are condemned to need some form of authority in the form of government and law to protect society's members from the effects of such inadequacies, unfortunately. It is common sense for a species wishing to live in harmony with one another to need to set limits within the realms of protection from harm, injury, or loss. The insufficiency in understanding and or inability to deal with the underlying causal mechanisms here is what leads to the inevitable outcome of needing to set laws and have a police force and court system to deal with such issues. And perhaps we will always need a police force of some kind given the vast complexity of human behaviour, but we could at least diminish the need for such a thing by having a society that is orientated to do so, couldn't we? Unfortunately, crime in the Matrix is a good thing, with companies such as Wack and Hut trading their stock on Wall Street, making money from having people in prison, as well as the slave labour they can employ from that population. This problem is most prevalent in the United States, which with only 5% of the global population houses 25% of all the world's prisoners. Over 2 million Americans are now in jail. The Matrix provides a good dose of fear and knee-jerk emotional reactions towards the issue of crime rather than dealing with the causal mechanisms of it as objectively as possible. Take the war on drugs. You only ever commit war on something you have no intention or no idea how to solve. Severe drug addiction, which encompasses the vast majority of prisoners, has been shown to have its roots in a lack of adequate nurturing in childhood. What is seen as a crime has been shown in countries like Portugal to be a public health issue which, if treated as such, can have a hugely beneficial outcome for society. Portugal decriminalised drugs over 12 years ago and has seen a 50% reduction in drug abuse. Income inequality has been shown to be a factor in a lower rate of drug abuse, and were it taken into account alongside the treatment approach of Portugal, this would diminish the need to have as large a treatment initiative on the other side of the equation as well. This issue is unfortunately riddled with opinion and rhetoric when it should only ever come down to the facts of what works to resolve the root cause of the issue at hand. An example related to crime would be the Merva Fowles study carried out across 30 major metropolitan areas with a total population of 80 million people, which found that a 1% increase in unemployment resulted in a 6.7% increase in homicides, a 3.4% increase in violent crime, and a 2.4% increase in property crime. This study shows that if needs in a society are not being met, then aberrant social behaviour should be an expected consequence. It is simple cause and effect, and not an issue of traditionalised and unfounded notions of free will. Laws stem from a scarcity, inefficiency, or an attempt at controlling human behaviour through the threat of punishment and force, and not about discerning a scientific understanding of the conditions that create aberrant behaviour. If food grew in abundance everywhere, there would be no laws regarding stealing it, and no money could be charged for it either. If it rained gold for a day, then people would pick it up and hoard it, but if it rained gold for 3 weeks, we would sweep it away. It is better that you put up a road traffic camera and speeding signs to turn over a profit from it and keep people in jobs, rather than implement a technical solution like driverless cars in our society, which would spare millions of families the anguish of losing a loved one in such a horrific and unnecessary way, not to mention all of the resources that could be saved from having rendered car accidents obsolete. Driverless cars have done 300,000 miles on the US roads in both urban and rural conditions with no accidents. But as the old saying goes, pass a law, make a business. I'm not saying that we could ever live in a world without prisons or police, but surely we should at least agree that we need to have a system that is inherently orientated towards diminishing the need to pass laws or use a police force, choosing instead to soberly ascertain the best way to solve the root cause of aberrant behaviour. Scarcity is the why, and abundance is the answer. Nobody steals anything that's abundant. All of these issues are capable of being reduced massively, if not completely resolved, but not in the current socio-economic system and the subsequent values that support it. This is the next transition in human life that must take place if we wish to survive in any meaningful way as a species on spaceship Earth. We must move from the economics of scarcity to a near post-scarcity era of access abundance to meet human need on a global scale in tandem with our surrounding environment. So what kind of system could produce such a world? A natural law, resource-based economy. This system is neither political or hierarchical and could be defined as the application of the scientific method for social concern. If we do not have an alternative economic model rooted in the best decision-making process we have ever come to know of, applied to the natural world in which we exist, then I'm afraid we are simply condemned to repeat past errors over and over again. Our current decision-making methods are bereft of any form of referential protocol, so such a system would indeed seem extremely alien to most. But try to imagine explaining modern society to someone from the Dark Ages. Of course, you should not accept a word I or anyone else has to say on the matter as the truth either. Check out these claims and let the evidence, logic and reason be your authority, and not personalities, fancy speeches, titles, or the notion of "that's just the way things are" cloud your judgment. The way things are has always and will always change. It is up to us to decide through our words and more importantly our actions what that change will be, but rest assured, merely by your presence on this planet, you will change things whilst you're here, whether you like it or not. What you change is up to you. So with this new decision-making process of the scientific method, let's run through a thought exercise to get a basic grasp of how an NLRBE works. Imagine we discover a new Earth, untouched by humans, and we can move all of the human population to our new planet. Where should we start in an effort to build our new society? Well, it would make sense to know what we have on board our planetary spaceship first, which we could do by doing a global resource survey, which can be achieved now with existing technologies such as satellites and sensors. This would take into account all relevant factors pertaining to optimal global resource management, but let's take the lifeblood of society as an example of this approach: energy. We would survey where and what the energy potentials are, plotting them into a chart listing all the relevant retroactions and potentials of those mediums, such as output, renewability, pollution, and alike, and then draw inference as to the most efficient and strategic approach using systems theory to meet our energy needs. This would be based on our most up-to-date understanding and technological approaches at the time, and would be updatable upon new findings and implementable without the need to make a profit getting in the way. And this is where the news is very good, because we have nothing but an abundance of clean energy right at our fingertips. A 2005 Stanford University study found that by harnessing just 20% of the potential of wind energy, we could supply half of all the world's energy needs. With the potential exponential increase in nanotechnology applied to the harnessing of solar radiation, it's estimated that this medium alone could supply the Earth with all its energy needs 1,000 times over in the not-too-distant future, which isn't really all that surprising considering the energy from the sun's rays hitting the surface of the Earth is roughly 23,000 times our energy use. Tidal has been estimated to be able to supply 34% of the UK's energy supply, for example, but overall power from the combination of all water-based technologies could supply 96% of all the world's energy needs if applied strategically. And geothermal energy has been estimated to contain enough energy potential to power the world for the next 4,000 years if applied with this systems theory approach to planetary management. So we now have an abundance of clean, renewable energy. Next, we need a system to manage and distribute this energy. The most effective tool we have for this job is computers and artificial intelligence. Computers can process trillions of bits of information a second and help us to arrive at more appropriate decisions in our economic operations. We would of course look to localize energy production based on the proximity of surrounding potentials, with redundancy protocols built in at every stage of development. So if there's a drop in supply in one energy medium, then another can pick up the slack automatically. No need to vote for it. It's self-evident and would react in much the same way as your body's nervous system does. Whilst this may have some complex variables, it's really nothing more than a glorified calculator. This example given with energy serves as a proxy for the method we would use in all other areas of the economy. In fact, this approach already is used, albeit in often unappreciated and detached ways, such as restocking at shopping centres, the ink level notifications on your personal printer, and the thermostat on your fridge. All we are doing is scaling this practice out to make sure that we are maintaining maximum efficiency and a balanced load economy. If you scale out the sort of true efficiency shown here with energy to all other areas of the social system, with strategic efficiency, preservation, and access built into the design intrinsically, by arriving at decisions via environmental feedback and the liberal application of the scientific method to the social design holistically, then the results in all other areas of the economy are equally impressive. Whether it is the use of hydroponic food towers capable of creating hundreds of times more agricultural yield than current farming methods, sustainable 3D printing of self-sufficient and robust housing, or long-distance maglev trains that can reach up to 4,000 miles per hour safely using just 2% the energy of planes with none of the harmful emissions, it is clear that our current system is embarrassingly retarded compared to what could be achieved if we actually used our technological and scientific understandings for human concern instead of using them to work out more effective ways of wasting our resources and killing each other. An NLRBE is, and eventually has to be, global in nature, and cannot function with the price mechanism holding it back through its inherent tendency towards self-maximization, monopolistic collusion, hierarchical dominance, and scarcity-reinforcing mechanisms. Money is not a science. It is not an irrefutable law of nature. Whilst it was once a useful method to manage scarcity, we have now simply outgrown its usefulness. Buckminster Fuller once said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." This is exactly what we must do. We must build a socio-economic system that does away with the mechanisms that produce contrived scarcity, war, poverty, debt, and servitude, and we must do this in a very real, feasible, and technical way, and not via some meaningless paper proclamation, political decree, or set of man-made laws. In Part 3 of the trilogy, the question regarding how we are to break free from the grip of the Matrix is addressed. In this final film, Neo realizes that he must go into the heart of the machine world to defeat it. So he takes a ship called the Logos into the heart of the Matrix. Logos means word, and the word, as mentioned earlier, is no. This is what we must do in the real world. We must reject this system and limit our dependency on it wherever possible, while spreading awareness of a new train of thought and positive direction in which we could head. However, the result should ironically not be the main focus here. The journey is. We are all born and we all die. It is what we stand for in between that defines us. In some ways, we will all live forever, through the repercussions of the actions we take in the present. So, I refuse to use the one life I have to support a system that produces poverty, war, and destitution for, as far as I know, the only family on the only planet to support conscious beings in the one and only life I will ever have. I choose to say no. But this train of thought must be followed up with action in the real world. In other words, sustained willpower. That is how we do it. Just as Neo does in the final scenes of the third film. Even when he has been blinded, he will not give up. This is precisely what we must do. It is not about what others do. The only relevant question to your conscience is, what are you going to do? When Neo reaches the mainframe, he strikes a deal to rid the Matrix of the rogue program that is Agent Smith, who represents death, in return for a peace with Zion. This alludes to the sort of virus that can run out of control and destroy everything if left unopposed, as well as perhaps hinting that we do have to have some form of system in place. The question is what kind of system we would like to have, and the answer is up to us. After Neo defeats Smith, the Architect and the Oracle meet with the Architect stating that the ones who wish to be freed will be. As far as we know, we are the only conscious creature alive in the universe. What a pity it would be to squander our enormous capacity for empathy, love, and care to our lower reptilian function of fear and aggression. An irrational fear of something which is essentially just a mirror image of ourselves. The question should not be can we do it? The question should be can we afford not to? Because for a long time now, the world's religious leaders, philosophers and writers have been proposing notions of how the world can become a more peaceful, happy and joyful place in which for us all to live. But the ability to technically achieve the abundance required for such a globally collaborative system was never a reality until now. We've achieved so much as a species, and to our knowledge are the greatest evolutionary success story this universe has ever created. Quite simply, we are amazing, and together there is nothing we can't do. We've changed before, and we can do it again, but not without effort. So I'm afraid the first change has to start with you, not someone else. In the final analysis, we are one people, and we share one planet.